Tonight, I want to talk on the subject of the capital punishment. Capital punishment. If you've been paying any attention to the news, you know that there's quite a debate on this matter. But whenever the matter of executions come up, there's always there's a debate, because there are a lot of folks on both sides of the issue. And I guess the question that many folks need to ask is, should capital punishment be part of a civilized society? And is it morally right to execute people? And the only way really we can find the answer to that question is if we believe the Bible or not. I don't know how else you can answer the question, because once we get away from the Bible and Bible principles, anything's up for grab. It's my opinion and your opinion, and that's really all it is. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm assuming, and I think that I'm right, that I'm talking to a house of Bible believers. Now, that does not mean that if you don't agree with me that you're not a Bible believer. I'm not saying that, because you may not be smart if you don't agree with me, but no. But I don't want to give you the impression that you're not a Bible believer if you don't agree with me. But my job as a pastor and my desire as a Christian is to preach what I understand the Bible to say. I'm not above being corrected, and I'm certainly not opposed to you coming to me and with questions or counter interpretations of Scripture and understanding of those Scriptures. I'm not going to use you in my next sermon illustration. We're not going to burn crosses on your front yard, and that's okay. And I don't have any problem with that. And in fact, I like for people to do things like that, and sometimes we can sit down and I can be persuaded, or you can be persuaded, or we can stay with our own convictions. But tonight, I want to try to show you what I believe the Bible says about this matter, and then let you draw your own conclusion. But nevertheless, when we go back to the beginning, and I want to go back to Genesis chapter 4, and kind of start from the very beginning, and then we'll just kind of run through the Bible on this matter, and we'll see what the Bible says on this subject of capital punishment. There in Genesis chapter 4, and down about verse 13 through 15, we read that Cain had killed his brother Abel, and God drove him out from his presence and away from his family. And in verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond. And it shall come to pass that everyone that findeth me shall slay me." Okay? So obviously you can already see the mindset and principles that existed in that day, that a person who had killed someone was worthy of death, right? Otherwise, there'd be no reason for the statement that those who find me will kill me. And but God came back with divine intervention in verse 15, and the Lord said unto him, "Therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any should find him, should kill him." Now, I have no idea what that means as far as a mark. I don't know what it means. And but it does mean that it was a protection. That is, at least whatever it is, it was something that was to protect him. It doesn't mean it was necessarily anything physical or visible, but there was something that God had done there. And so God protected him. But nevertheless, there was this mindset, and I think rightfully so, that if you kill somebody or murdered somebody, that you deserve to have your life taken. At least that was the belief, and that was the belief that Cain held, that that's what was going to happen to him. And God protected him. and showed his mercy on him. Now, you notice out of Cain's descendants, you have a fellow named Lamech there in chapter 4 and verse 23. And this, of course, is the genealogy of Cain's family. And down there in verse 23, and he said to his wives, he said, I have slain, verse 23, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. In other words, someone attacked Lamech and tried to kill him, tried to slay him. And in defense, he killed him. So he said, I have to my wounding and my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. In other words, if Cain was a cold-blooded murderer and had the grace of God to protect him, and I kill someone in self-defense, then I should be protected 70-fold is the idea here. But you're noticing they're talking about protection from judgment on what they had done. So you get the kind of the mindset that's going on there at that time even. And by the time of Noah, if you move over to chapter 6, by the time you get to Noah, we find that the whole earth had corrupted itself and was filled with violence. In fact, violence filled the earth. If you go to chapter 6 down there and verse 11, and of course judgment is announced there, and the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy the earth. Well, I guess that's capital punishment too, don't you? That's kind of wholesale. Some fellow said when it comes to executing, we shouldn't have electric chairs, we should have electric couches. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't, I don't want to go that. You know the idea, you take about 6 at a time. But that's not my point. It's a good joke for some people. But listen, when God took care of capital punishment, He did it wholesale. And the reason He took them out, if you notice, it was because the earth was absolutely corrupt and what? Full of violence. Now, violence is something you do to somebody else. That's what it is. That violence is you are robbing and killing and hurting people. That's what violence does. Corruption maybe is the immoral side of it. And both of those were there, and God said, I'm going to wipe them out. So we got Cain here who killed his brother, and he said, anybody finds me is going to kill me. And then we got Lamech who said, I killed a fellow who attacked me to protect my life, and therefore if Cain was protected sevenfold, then I should be 77. In other words, because I did this in self-defense. Now, after the flood, some things began to change. A lot of things changed after the flood. The earth itself began to change as far as the environment was concerned. A man's diet changed after the flood. Before the flood, everybody they were all vegetarians. After the flood, they were allowed to eat meat as long as they made sure they drained the blood out of it. There were a lot of human government was established for the purpose of protecting people. And we'll talk about that perhaps a little bit later. But you'll notice in chapter 9 of Genesis, in verse 5 and 6, 9, 5, and 6, notice he says, and surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. In other words, what God is saying here, that if you murder people, I'm going to use the beast of the forest and I'm going to use the family members to execute you. In other words, there is judgment for taking people's lives. Now notice what he says just a little bit. For verse 6, he'll tell you why. Whosoever sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. Now, if you're wondering what is at the root of capital punishment, as far as God is concerned, it is because God values human life. And you were made in God's image. You get the picture? And that is the bottom line as far as God is concerned. Society has other reasons and other thoughts and other ideas. But God's purpose, primarily, is that life is precious and man is made in the image of God. And He instituted capital punishment to protect man. And we'll talk about that as we move along, and I think you'll see that. And so to kill a person who is created in the image of God is a serious offense worthy of death. That's what the Bible says. And so man is created in God's images, and man possesses the ability to exercise judgment. Actually righteous judgment. And you are capable of being a worthy administrator of capital punishment. God has given man the ability to judge righteously and correctly if He will. But sad to say, there's another motivating factor in most cases. And you know what it is, always the bottom line, isn't it? It's called M-O-N-E-Y. That's what it's all about. And that's why you don't have righteous judgment many times, and that's why things are not done as they ought to be done. It's because of money. So before the flood, when people took God's word, and you can see that Cain understood that killing had consequences. And then after the flood, God Himself, you'll notice, administered a form of capital punishment, or at least during the flood, He brought in the flood. And then after the flood, He charged man with the responsibility to take a life. Before the flood, He protected them. Then at the flood, He destroyed them. After the flood, He gave man the responsibility to administer judgment, righteous judgment, in dealing with these matters. Now, as we move a little bit further over, you go over into the New Testament, or over into the, not the New Testament, you go over into the Old Testament, and go to Exodus chapter 21. And, of course, Israel, by this time, in fact, in chapter 20, Israel received the Constitution to become a nation. Remember, they went down into Egypt under Jacob's sons. They sold Joseph down there, and then a famine came in the land, if you've been studying the book of Genesis. And finally the 70 souls went down into Egypt to escape the famine and to be preserved. And while they were there, they were there 400 years, they became a mighty nation up into the millions. And yet they did not have a constitution. They didn't have any real leadership. They had priests, of course, but not the Levitical priest. Usually the head of the house was a priest. And they came out of the land, and the Passover went through the Red Sea. They came to Mount Sinai, and there God began to give them the laws and constitution and organize them as a nation. So He gave them these laws because nations cannot function without laws. It's impossible. And so God gave this nation. Now, I believe that God would give to Israel the best form of human government a nation could have. If you think that if you believe God gave Israel the form of a righteous government, as far as civil laws, etc., then you would assume that He would give them the best government possible. Why wouldn't you? I mean, if God gave it. And by the way, this country is patterned much after the democracy taught, about the laws taught in Scripture. If you go up here to most courthouses, you go up here to Everett. I don't know what this Linwood situation is, but you go to Everett, there's a monument out on the street corner that has the 10 Commandments. Probably the courthouse has the 10 Commandments. Does the courthouse have 10 Commandments in there? You don't know. Okay. But anyway, most of them do. Now, so the laws then, God gave laws to Israel, both civil and religious. And these served as the basis for criminal judgment. And in it you'll find capital punishment as prescribed for certain crimes. Let's go to Exodus chapter 21 and verse, 12 through 14. All right, you got it? He that smiteth a man so that he die shall surely be put to death. And if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will appoint thee a place where he shall flee. In other words, if this is not an intentional murder, if this is an accidental murder, then God says, I will appoint a place where the fellow can go and be safe. And that's where the cities of refuge come in, as you read about them in Joshua and Judges. And if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither thou shalt flee. But if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, thou shalt take him from mine altar, that he may die. So in other words, if you have premeditated murder, the penalty was capital punishment. If you go to Exodus 21, look at verse 15, parental abuse. He that smiteth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Isn't that something? You didn't slap your mom and dad and kick them around. And God said, you slap your dad, hit your dad or mother, you're going out to the rock pile. All right. Notice again, kidnapping, verse 16. He that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Kidnapping is a capital crime. You kidnap somebody, you die. And why not? Right? Okay, well, we'll find out. Okay, how about verse 17? He that curseth his father or his mother shall be put to death. Use profanity and call your dad or mom something, you just do it once. In other words, Dad says that's once. There's not going to be a second time. Not only that, but if you strike an expecting mother, you got a mother that's carrying a child and you hit her and she loses her baby, you committed murder. Let's go to verse 22 and down through 25, I believe it is. 22 through 25. And if a man strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished according to the woman's husband that he will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life. If her baby dies, or something happens to her, then it's back to the rock pile. Okay? And eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand to hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, and wound for wound, and stripe for stripe. Okay? If you kill a thief in revenge, look at verse 22. Look at chapter 22, verse 2 and 3. If a thief be found breaking up, and be smitten that he die, there shall no blood be shed for him. If the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed for him, for he should make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he shall be sold for a thief, or for his theft. And so, failure to keep. If you go down to verse 28, the failure to I skipped one. Failure to keep an animal pinned up that kills people, like pit bulls and anything else. But look at chapter 21 and down about verse 28. 21, 28. If an ox gore a man or a woman that they die, then the ox shall be put to surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quiet. But if the ox were wont, that is, if it were known to push with his horns in times past, and it hath been testified to his owner, and he hath not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. If you've been given a heads up that your animal is dangerous and attack people, and you don't pay any attention, and it goes out and kills somebody, you're guilty. That's what it says, isn't it? All right. You couldn't kill a thief for revenge. And down here in Seattle recently, some fellow stole a car. And the owner, if you remember, ran after him and shot him and killed him. And the owner's in trouble, and rightfully so. You cannot kill people because you can't chase people down who steal your television set and shoot them. You can't do that. You cannot. I mean, if your neighbor, he comes in and robs everything in your house, you can't go get your gun and go over and shoot him. And you shouldn't. See, that's not the. But if somebody breaks into your house and your life's in jeopardy, it's a different situation. But you can't pursue a thief, and it's best not to pursue him anyway. let somebody else do it. You know, really. You know, you don't want to be chasing them. There's a girl, did you hear about the girl here just recently? A waitress down in Texas. Some guys came in, maybe somebody she knew, they ordered a meal, they didn't pay for it. They walked out without paying. She chased them. They got in the car. She chased them. They backed the car over and killed her intentionally. She's dead, you know, going after the price of a meal. You don't mess with it. You say, let somebody else take care of that stuff, okay? In chapter 22 and verse 19, 22:19, bestiality. Whosoever lieth with a beast shall surely be put to death. Okay? And then chapter 20 and verse 13. 20:13. Well, this would thin out society. That's not what I want. 20:13. I want 20:10. 20:10. I think I do. No, I got a wrong reference. Maybe it's 21. Talking about adultery. Is it 21:10? Okay. 21:10. No. Yes. If he take him another wife. No, I don't know what. I've got a wrong reference. Is it 20:14? Yeah. Okay. But we know what the penalty was, because a woman was taken in adultery and brought to the Lord Jesus Christ. You remember the Pharisees wanted her killed, and that was the penalty in the law. And look at 20:13. I hope I have a right reference here. Oh, that's right. No wonder. Thank you, brother. In the wrong book. Right Bible, wrong book. I'm just assuming that everything's in Exodus. Okay. Yeah. Look at 20:13. 20:13. If a man also lie with a mankind, as he lieth with a woman, both of them shall have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. Okay. And then incest. In Leviticus 20 and verse 14. I believe it is. Yeah. And if a man take a wife and her mother, it is wickedness, and they shall be burnt with fire, both he and they, because of this wickedness, okay? And it's a horrible sin. And of course, mediums and spiritualists in verse 27 of the same chapter, and breaking the Sabbath in Numbers 15. Now we have to ask the question, is the law good? Is that a good law? Well, I believe God gave it, and therefore it was a good law. There's no doubt about it. And Paul himself said concerning the law, if you go to Romans chapter 7 with me, Romans chapter 7, and see what the Apostle Paul said about the law. In Romans chapter 7, and look down about verse 12. 7:12. Wherefore, the law is holy, and he's talking about these Old Testament laws, and the commandments holy, and just and good. So the problem is never with the law that God gives. There's not a problem with God's law. And of course, the religious aspects of the Old Testament law were temporary. They were nailed to the cross when Jesus died on the cross. But the moral laws are still there. And the civil laws, of course, served their purpose well. And the reason God gave these laws to the nation of Israel was to preserve a nation, to preserve that nation. And he was to keep that nation, the point was to keep the nation pure, and to keep it righteous, and to keep it fearing God. And that's why they were told about marriages, not to marry. Solomon was told not to marry women of other nations. They'd turn your heart away from God. He didn't pay any attention, and that's exactly, in fact, you know, Solomon brought more disgrace and damage to the nation of Israel than any king they ever had. Because, more than Saul. Saul was more wicked, but the decisions that Solomon made destroyed the nation of Israel. You know, it was God said, I'm going to do it after after he dies, the only reason I don't judge him is for David's sake. But it was because of Solomon that nation fell apart, because he brought idolatry in. He married all the foreign wives and built houses for their idols, and they were all in the land. And when he died, the land completely split apart, and in time the nation was driven out of the land. But that was all because of Solomon's intermarriage with strange women and foreign women and their gods. Now, when you come to the New Testament, keep in mind that we're no longer dealing with a nation as far as the church is concerned. You're not dealing with a nation. The church is not a nation. It doesn't have a government per se. It doesn't have any right to exercise any capital punishment upon anybody. The only right that the church has as far as judgment is concerned is how to deal with certain issues within the church. And in most cases, it is to try to restore people. And when that's impossible, then the church has to remove those people, and sometimes from the body itself. But even before that, if people will not do right, then we as individuals, says, have no fellowship with that person, so that they'll be ashamed and they'll repent and do right. You understand what I just said? But we don't have any legal right over anybody as a church. We are not God's kingdom on the earth. And but we as a church are within governments. And if we go to the Philippines, we abide by their government. If we go to India, we abide by their governments. You understand? Because God has put these powers not in churches, but in governments, as we'll see in just a moment. And so God has designed that the church to be a spiritual organization. Now, we are salt, we are light, we are citizens, and as citizens in this country, we are allowed to vote. We have freedom of speech, and we have freedom of press and travel. And thank God for that, because some people take that for granted, and many countries don't have that. And we've had it for so long that we just take it for granted, and we sometimes assume everybody has it. If you really want to love America, go abroad for a while, and you'll kiss the ground when you come back. I'm telling you. But you have to go and get out for a while and quit listening to the news media. This is not the worst place on the earth. I'll tell you what, I hear more negative, and I'm telling you the truth, I hear more negative about America in America than anywhere else on the planet. I was in the Philippines, they love America. I was in India, they love America. Oh, you can find 2 or 3 people that hate it and they get all the cameras around it. But most of the people love this country. But the projection is everybody hates us. News media says, why does everybody hate America? I'm telling you, everybody doesn't hate America. Why? Everybody's trying to get to America. Don't kid yourself. There are people in our country who hate America. And I'm telling you, in my opinion, the biggest enemies are in our country. And the biggest threat is in our country. And so, thank God that we have this freedom. It's a gift to us. And these men that are going out to sea and going by land and air, they are fighting and dying that we might have these freedoms. See? That's why they're laying their life down. So that we can sit here tonight and stand here tonight and go down and have a meal, and you can go home and you don't have to worry about somebody, bothering you. You have freedom in this country to do that. See? And that's the way it ought to be. And I'll tell you what, most countries would like to have this kind of government, but the dictators won't allow it. See? Jesus himself, made it very clear when he said to his disciples, my kingdom is not of this world. In other words, it doesn't come from this world system, it comes from God. But God has established governments. And go to Romans 13 and notice that in that chapter, in Romans 13, we'll see that at least in Paul's day, capital punishment, and he wasn't under the Old Testament now, but capital punishment was still practiced. It was practiced by Rome. It was practiced by other nations. And at least here's what Paul says about governments. He said, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Now that is not damnation in hell. That is judgment from that government. It is talking about government. It is talking about powers that be. You'll see that in verse 3. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he, verse 4, for he is a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the what? The sword. Now you know what the sword was used for, don't you? It wasn't for traffic control. You know, it was used to remove part of your body from the shoulders up. See? So this whole thing here is talking about civil powers. And God says that governments, now that doesn't mean they're righteous, doesn't mean they're good. They can go sour. But God still instituted governments. And as far as possible, you should always go along with your government. You should go as far as you can. Now, not even Jesus could go all the way with his government. John couldn't go all the way with his. Peter didn't. That's why they were in prison. That's why they lost their head. So there is a limit that you can go. You understand that? And you need to expect the consequences. Now, what if it's against the law to pass out tracts? I say pass them out anyway. Now, you say, well, what if a police officer comes to arrest you? Just say, you know what? I know you're doing your job. He's doing his job. Now, most of the time, a guy won't arrest you. He'll warn you. He'll talk to you. And he may tell you to move on down the street or something. Depends on the fellow that talks to you. But there's a limit. What if they say you can't preach anymore? Well, I'm going to preach. I hope. You understand? I mean, you have to. What if a fellow said that you couldn't work and feed your kids anymore? Well, you'd steal to feed them, because you're going to feed your family. You are going to feed them, and you're going to steal to feed them if you have to. But God has ordained governments, and we need to pray and to know how far and when are we losing our religious freedoms. And now we fight for freedom of property. In this country, you can own property. Of course, you pay big time for it. You pay everybody for it in taxes. But at least we still have the right to own property. Do you know if John Cook is up in Canada, has been a missionary there for years, do you know the church can't own property? You didn't know that. Can't own property. No way. And in many of these countries, you cannot own property to build a church. You can build a church, maybe, but you do not own the property. And so we are a blessed nation. And the reason is because this nation 200 years ago was built on the principles of the Word of God. See? And so government authorities are established by God. And they serve as ministers of God, whether they're saved or not. It doesn't make any difference. That's not the point. They don't have to be saved to be serving God. And so that is, that is their position. And they serve as ministers of God to execute wrath upon those who practice evil. And so they can arrest you, and they should take you to court, and you can be tried, and if it's a capital crime, you can be executed, because the government is granted the power to do that by God. Okay? That's why you are not granted that power. You can't take those things into your own hands. And so when government fulfills its responsibilities upon those who are evil, then it does not bear the sword in vain. I heard the other day that, now this may not be true, but I heard that the police officers in England can't carry weapons. Is that right, Jim, or do you know? A few pistols. Police officer walked into a situation the other day, was stabbed with a knife multiple times and killed. See? And, man, I tell you what, the only reason I'd be a police officer is to have a gun, I can't imagine sending a man out to deal with a crime situation without him being armed properly. Well, you're sending men to a lion. You wouldn't send a man in to tame a lion without a chair and a whip. You know, send him in with a feather. Say, oh, now, nice kitty. See? So it's silly. I mean, it just is ridiculous. You see. But when we start going that way, societies go crazy, and they start falling apart. And so this bearing the sword in vain, bearing the sword is an allusion to, I think, to the administrating of capital punishment. And therefore, I believe the New Testament supports the right of governments to practice capital punishment. Now, if they don't want to, if America votes to not have capital punishment, then that is what this government will do. And the only thing you can do and should do would be to vote the other way if you believe in capital punishment. But you can't go out and enforce capital punishment as a citizen or as a church member. Go to Acts 25 and verse 11. Acts 25:11. You'll notice the Apostle Paul certainly didn't get a sign and picket Rome. And notice what he said in 25:11. For if I be an offender or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof they accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal to Caesar. So you'll notice the Apostle Paul recognized the right of the government. And if I've done something worthy of death, then he said, I'm going to submit to that. But I don't believe I have, so I'm going to make my appeal to Caesar, to the highest court. And he went to the Supreme Court. Well, at least that was where he was headed. And so he was willing to die if he'd committed anything worthy of death. So in Paul's mind, there were capital crimes. There were crimes that were worthy of death. All right, now let's notice some common objections that we hear to capital punishment. For instance, usually opponents of capital punishment will quote one of the 10 Commandments. You know which one it is? Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not kill. There in Exodus, it's in 20:13. But if you will look at the context of 20:13, you will see again that it's talking about premeditated murder. And in fact, in the very next chapter, in chapter 21, it makes it very clear that if you do kill somebody with premeditating murder, then your life is to be taken. So people who quote one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill, they are either ignorant of what the Bible says, or they're not ignorant, they just don't believe the Bible, but they're using that which supports their purpose, which is not uncommon for people to do. Now, in the next two chapters of chapter 21 and 22, God endorses a capital punishment. Not only that, sometimes you'll hear people say from Ezekiel 18:32 that God has no pleasure in the death of the wicked. That's what he says there in in Ezekiel 18:32. He says, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. But what God is saying here is that he does not want people to die in wickedness and as a result of wickedness. In other words, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. In other words, he wants them to repent and die in righteousness. That's what the context is talking about if you look at it. And but he's not saying that he doesn't want wicked people to be executed. He's saying, I want them to repent. And I believe, I don't know how you'd verify it, but I believe there are men who do repent, and they still pay for their crime. And rightfully so. For instance, if you or I, if we went out and premeditated a murder and killed somebody, we were lost, and you go to jail, and you go through the procedures, somebody comes in, presents the gospel to you, and you accept Christ as your Savior. You're still going to be executed. But you're not dying as a wicked person. You see, you're not dying as a lost man or woman.